movement that has happened, there's definitely been a celebratory story around India. What happened that the world, barring Taiwan and, just one or two other countries, nobody really stood by India resolutely? There's been enough proof after the 2008 attack, after the Pulwama attack, sort of evidence after evidence to show that there are terror infrastructures. The Defense Minister, Khwaja Mohammed himself, has said we've played America's dirty games. Why has all the diplomacy that's happened, why did the global community not rally around India?
I think the global community rallied around India in the aftermath of the terrorist attack. Because we don't need to tell the world about the nature of Pakistan. I mean, a lot of our own understanding about Pakistan comes from Western intelligence sources. They have a pretty clinical and granular view of what is the situation in Pakistan today. So there was a great deal of sympathy in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attack. But once the situation moves away from terrorism to a military standoff between two nuclear powers who are traditional adversaries, perspectives will change. And we have to accept that, because as I said, the world is not going to look at you through your eyes. They will see, they don't want a nuclear flashpoint in South Asia. So it is inevitable. If there's a major military standoff emerging, the perspective will move away from being sympathetic to the victim of a terrorist attack to a more even-handed perspective on how to deal with these traditional adversaries.
I'm going to come back to that nuclear question to you, and whether it's a bogey that the West uses very conveniently. But let me pull you into it, Bharat. You have in particular written deeply about nuclear issues and in the subcontinent, and of course, your assessment of Operation Sindoor is that you would have liked it to go even further, So that question that I asked General Naravne, what do you think has been achieved, and what makes you disappointed with the outcome of Operation Sindoor?
Well, look, I think there's a real problem with our policy and the way we approach Pakistan.
Will you speak into the mic?
Sorry. There's a fault, as I said, in our approach to Pakistan. We think of Pakistan as an adversary, as the High Commissioner put it, which I think is, in some sense, elevating Pakistan. It is a country that is 10 to 13 times weaker economically. It's a quarter of India's size. When you make Pakistan an adversary, we reduce ourselves to Pakistan's size, do we not? And this is the unfortunate thing when we talk of hyphenation and so on, because we end up hyphenating ourselves with Pakistan. It's something that's not been understood either by the government or the MBO or anybody else. Now, the point to make about Sindoor is this. If the idea was that for the first time we have crossed certain thresholds, for instance, we call the nuclear bluff. How? Because earlier the Pakistanis put out that if you're going to hit any targets across the international border, not the line of control, which is disputed territory, we'd be free to go first use. Well, what happened? Nothing. It's what I've been saying for 30 years. The reason being, it's all very well for Pakistan to jump up and down and talk about first use. But are the Pakistanis not professional? By the way, let me just vouch for the professionalism, the Pakistan Army in particular. There's something called an exchange ratio, which the general would be, better, positioned to explain. But exchange ratio means the ratio of destruction you impose on the enemy vis-a-vis the destruction that you suffer. In a nuclear war, let's be very clear. Fortunately, there have been no nuclear wars. So what we have are a whole bunch of war games played all over the place. And in thousands of such games, iterative games, war games of the nuclear tripwire and so on, including here in the NSC, where we have played games, the exchange ratio is this. 2 Indian cities will be lost. Yes. For the extinction of Pakistan as a social organism. Why is that? Because most of Pakistan's population centers, wealth-producing centers, lie within 50 kilometers from the border, north to south in a corridor. It's very easy to take out. If you're a physicist amongst you, if you have 20 kiloton weapons, blowing up the corridor in various places, if you space them right, you can virtually make Pakistan extinct. The Pakistanis know it. Everybody else and the uncles knows it, except perhaps we, because we jump up and down. Our media doesn't understand anything about nuclear matters. Neither do I must say, our MA and our government, because they're spooked by the notion of nuclear. There's nothing to be spooked about. If you're able to absorb a nuclear attack is when you begin talking about initiating an attack. But if you're going to sink, if you're going to become extinct, you're not going to initiate anything, which is what has been proved this time around. So it's a good thing. Now, what happened on May 10th, if you give me 2 minutes? May 10th is when we struck all their strategic targets, meaning, and principally, at the Noor Khan base, we took out their command, control, and communications hub. The C3 hub was taken out. That C3 hub essentially controlled the air warfare. They controlled their PAF aircraft. PAF was grounded after the May 10th early morning attacks. How did that happen? This is just a thing that I've written about it in my blog. But after the first day's downing of Indian aircraft, Asim Munir, in his sort of vainglorious fashion, told Shehbaz Sharif that we can now sort out the Indians in 48 hours. 48 hours. This was picked up by Indian intelligence and the Indian government, and this is the nature of our intramural conflict. These are not serious wars. I don't take India-Pakistan wars as serious wars. A 3-day war is not a war.
But
let me just finish.
Yes.
So if you're talking about wars, then you have to be more serious. What I really think is important and pertinent to India-Pakistan wars is what Major General Palit, D.K. Palit, perhaps the finest scholar soldier the Indian Army or the Indian military has produced, called them. He called them communal riots with tanks. Now, if that is the case, then you have to wonder how serious you were to take advantage of the opportunities offered you. Here, all the PAF was down. You had established air dominance. What should you have done by way of an enduring solution? I've written that what you should have done, and this is, by the way, on April 22nd when I wrote it, we should have thought and prepared for taking Hajipir salient. Why Hajipir salient? But if you took the salient, you'd immediately rationalize the LOC. You would then deny the infiltration route, the main infiltration route into Srinagar Valley, when you take the Hajipir salient. And you would have sent across a very, very, very hard message to the Pakistanis that because this is across the LOC, and because they had suspended the Simla Accord of 1972, and it was therefore a ceasefire line. They stressed it again. A ceasefire line under international law can be changed to your advantage using military means. You had absolute legitimacy under law to then take Hajipir salient and sit there.
So, Bharat, if General Naravane is still here, I would like to pass him the mic to ask him why. So, just to sum up 2 points that you've made, is that you're saying, why did India accept, let's assume it's the DGMO of Pakistan that reached out saying, let's have a ceasefire. Your point is, India had the advantage, why did it accept the ceasefire? It should have gone and occupied Hajipir. Do you think that that's a bit of armchair strategy because you're not in the army and, you're not really game playing what could happen if, do you think you should serve in Siachen before you say these things?
Well, look, this is the real problem. We think of these 3-day affairs that we have that we call wars, as a periodic crises that we sort of, stumble into every 3 or 4 years. Is this what you want, or do you want an enduring solution? Very simple. Now, obviously, the
but would there not be retaliation to them if, let's assume, the Indian army went into Hajipir? There would be a huge escalation. Are you advocating all-out war?
No, listen. This is the LOC. The line of control in a disputed territory cannot become a nuclear tripwire, incidentally. Cannot become a nuclear tripwire because it's disputed under international law. Now, that said, the question is, had you kept it? By the way, in 1965 war, we had taken Hajipir. The Indian Army's 1st Para Regiment captured it. But we had to return it in Tashkent because the Pakistan Army had captured Cham, near Akhnur. So it was an exchange. Okay, you give back Akhnur, Cham, and we'll take back Hajipir, right? What happened in 71? They took Cham and never returned it for the same reason that I'm mentioning. So we had no reason to ever return Hajipir.
So you've constantly been advocating that India has been ahead of the curve, but always stopped. Even on the 71 war, you have written that, Pakistan would have run out of ammunition in another week. India still had 2-3 weeks of ammunition, and yet, peace was...
That is 65 war.
65 war.
Yes. We had 14 weeks of ammunition. That's the official history, not me speaking. The official history of the war, 65 war, said that we had 14 weeks of ammunition and other stock spares and whatnot at intense rates of fire, expenditure of the ammo and so on. And the Pakistanis were down to a week at most, 4 or 5 days actually. And who said this? K. Subramaniam, Jaishankar's dad, and my colleague in the First National Security Advisory Board. Now, what was the problem? Again, we stopped. In 71 again, in the West we did nothing, but we lost Cham. We got Bangladesh, but we lost Cham, and we lost advantage in the West. So
your position is that India should become more hawkish and go the full hog?
Not hawkish. You just take use of the opportunities presented you, which you do not take advantage of. Why are you in a military contest if you don't take advantage of the position that you've gained? Okay. That's the problem.
Mr. Raghavan, I would love you to respond to that, and General Naravane, I would love you to respond to that, so I'm going to pass the mic to you. Preksha, if you can just pass the mic to him. Yes.
Well, I must confess, the second half of my career, without quite intending it, was funneled into dealing with Pakistan. And in that second half, I must confess, there was never a realistic option of a solution to Pakistan in terms of vaporizing the country. So I don't think, these things that they can take out 2 cities, but we can wipe them out, is a realistic situation at all.
Yes.
Secondly, in dealing with Pakistan, we've always built up mythologies. In 48, the mythology was the army should have been allowed to finish the job, take Skardu, take back POK. In 65, why did we give back Hajipir? And in 71 again, we lost on the negotiating table what we won on the battlefield. These are all mythologies. And if you look into the actual historical archive, you will realize that, in fact, like most mythologies, they have very little factual or evidential basis. You deal with a very, very difficult neighbor. There are no easy solutions. There's no easy diplomatic solution. There's no easy military solution. It's not as if a military option is going to change the nature of Pakistan. We are deluding ourselves to think that after the May crisis, somehow Pakistan is going to be a relatively more benign neighbor. It's not going to happen. You similarly don't have anything in your diplomatic toolkit which will change the nature of Pakistan. Only Pakistanis can change the nature of Pakistan. You have to deal with your neighborhood as it is and not the way you would like it to be. You have similar problems with other neighbors. With Pakistan, it's a more intense case, but essentially you have a difficult neighborhood because your much larger, and you're the regional hegemon, not just in a military or an economic sense, but in a very fundamental and profound way in different senses. So you have to deal with your neighborhood. There's no perfect military or diplomatic solution which would mean that you have solved Pakistan and now you can go back to building up your global aspirations. You have to focus on your neighborhood. You have to deal with issues as they come up. Yes, it will occasionally mean that you have to use hard power. But I don't think we should delude ourselves into thinking that hard power will solve the problem. Just like there is a certain triumphalism in India today, that very, very strong messages have been sent to Pakistan. There's a similar mood of triumphalism in Pakistan, that we have sent very, very strong messages to India. Both sides, in a sense, are looking at the positives which they have walked away from this conflict. Your neighborhood is where it was before the 8th of May. It's not changed.
That's a, I'm going to just step across General Naravne, if I may, just because just as this tactical question that he asked, that when India was at an advantage in all the wars, why does it stop short? Of course, it's a political decision, and thank God we have an army that listens to the political establishment. But would you take on his question? You know, do you think that India caves in too fast? Would you advocate what he said? Let's go ahead and take Hajipir.
No, see, if you go back to that Clausewitzian statement that, war is an extension of politics by other means. So ultimately you come back to that political question. And what is the political aim to be achieved, which has been achieved or sought to be achieved through the use of military force. So you have to come back to that thing, that what was the political dispensation, their thought process, and what they felt was a satisfactory outcome of that whole war. And if they felt that those aims have been achieved, then obviously they will ask the military to stop taking those actions. So that is how that interplay happens between the armed forces and the political dispensation of that day.
Right. So, I'm just going to ask you about the other issues that have been brought up, and I asked this to General Naravne also, that given that this is, everyone accepts it's an escalation like there hasn't been before, and India has crossed several thresholds, including the Indus Waters Treaty, that what do you think then has been positively achieved by all the actions of the last 1.5 months?
I think, the main positive achievement from my perspective is that you have sent a certain message about the national outrage in India about this terrorist attack. And that you conveyed through first putting the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, and that's a very powerful message. The fact that we did it so quickly after the terrorist attack, and in a mood which was really focused more on the military action which was follow, in a sense you undermined the importance of this step. Because it is for Pakistan, which is a lower riparian and it has a lower riparian mindset, it's possibly the most powerful political message you could have sent. And in many ways, at least to my mind, it is a much more stronger message than any kinetic measure you can take. Let's not forget, this is something which we could have done earlier, but consciously chose not to go into this area. So it is possibly the most powerful arrow you had in your quiver, but as I said, you took it very quickly. Almost, even as you were taking it, the conversation had shifted to the military measures or the kinetic measures which we're going to follow. So I think you have sent certain powerful messages, but then to follow up on those messages, you require diplomacy. And you cannot have a touch-me-not attitude that I won't engage with Pakistan because of X, Y, Z. Because if you take that position, then you can't follow up or you cannot capitalize on the messages which you have sent.
So I'm going to draw Bharat into that, but just one question on the Indus Water Treaty. 80% of Pakistan's water runs through India first. What was the rationale why, India agreed to take only 15% of that water? Why was that original treaty signed in the first place? Secondly, now by withholding it, is it just, again, yes, it's a new threshold, but is it only symbolic? Because one doesn't have the structures to really stop the water. And secondly, we are vulnerable to China as well. So if one starts doing that, are you, it's that escalation ladder. Are you going down a path which is, a sort of catastrophic for everybody?
Well, first of all, the treaty did not give the water to Pakistan. It's not as if because of the treaty we keep 15% of the water and 80% of the water goes to Pakistan. The water flows in that way because of the curvature of the globe. And it's not to do with the treaty. That's the way the water has always flowed, and that's the way the water will continue to flow. The treaty was meant to reassure Pakistan's lower riparian concerns. And so when you keep the treaty in abeyance, it's much more than symbolic. It's true, you don't have the infrastructure to immediately stop the water. You will never have that infrastructure. Because if you see the Jhelum or the Chenab in spate, I mean, to stop that, you need to flood the whole of the Srinagar Valley. It's not possible. But by putting it in abeyance, you prey on their lower riparian anxieties. And those anxieties run very, very deep. And as I said, it's possibly the most powerful political instrument you have in your quiver.
Mr. Raghavan, sorry for calling you out on that, but do you think we are, like you said, don't buy into your own delusions. If you are intelligent enough to understand that one can't stop the water, then why will it be anxious for the Pakistanis? They understand that as well.
Because while you cannot stop the water, you can interfere with water flows at critical periods during the agricultural season, and your capacities to do so can only increase in time. And the Pakistanis are aware of that. It's not for nothing that they are so hypersensitive about the water's issue. And as I said, it's a predominantly agricultural country, and the riparian issues have been at the core of Pakistan identity from 1947 onwards. So this point about withholding a drop of water as an act of war, it goes to the fundamentals of the creation of Pakistan in 1947, 1948. Your question about are we opening a new front and we are a lower riparian to China? Yes, I think those are issues. But the fact is China has no river water agreements with any of its riparian neighbors. So it's not as if they have bound themselves into certain patterns of behavior the way we did with some of our
It's just
neighbors.
that they're more capable of building a dam that will stop the Brahmaputra than we are capable of stopping the Bias or Sutlej,
Well, yes, if they build those dams, it will impact water flows to some extent. But on the other hand, most of the catchment of the Brahmaputra is within Indian territory itself. So while it makes some difference, it doesn't make such an enormous difference that life will come to a standstill. And you will have to then prepare yourselves or build up countervailing structures to cope with those shortages which can be imposed at certain points of time. But it's not as catastrophic as is made out, that water is suddenly snapped and the riverbed dries up completely. That's not a realistic scenario.
Right. So, Bharat, just to pull you into two questions. One was about the conventional, weaponry that was on display. I asked General Naravne that as well, but what is your assessment of it? There's been a lot of global debate that suddenly China's weapons looked great. It's much less expensive than American weaponry, to the ratio of the drones are 1 to 2 million and the American drones are 30 million. The Rafale is 300 million. The J-10s are 30 million. So it's really like gigantic differences in costs and efficiency. What is your understanding of this?
Well, look, I think the Pakistan Air Force has been very innovative in its tactics. It's always been so. I've said it from the very beginning that their pilots are of a high caliber than the Indian Air Force, simply because they have had exposure to the Western tactics and so on much before the Indian Air Force did.
Why are you so admiring of them when they've thankfully lost every war they've had with India?
No, that's not the point. The point is that in air warfare, they've held their own. Please. So we have to be realistic, rather than jingoistic. And one thing is very clear, that when you mentioned the cost differential, the PL-15E, which is the long-range missile that shot down the Indian aircraft, costs about $200,000. The Indian combat aircraft that was brought down cost, as you see, $300 million. That's almost 2,000 times more costly to lose an aircraft than it is for the Pakistanis to fire that missile at you that brought it down. That becomes the reason why you have to have very innovative tactics, which the Pakistanis have. What did they use? For instance, the thing that they really innovated was they used the Swedish ERI 2000, Saab 2000 airborne early warning and control system to cue the pilot in the JC-10, which is their very advanced medium combat aircraft, to the target. While the JC-10 is flying in a passive mode, meaning there's no electronic emanations, it's in radio silence, it's flying. And then, once it is cued, what they did was they fused the information systems of the missile to the aircraft to the AWACS, which I don't know whether our side had anticipated this kind of thing. Because when they got into this kill mode, well, this is speculation, of course, but the question is, how was it that an Indian airplane flying in Indian airspace was brought down? This is how it was brought down. Because you got into a situation where, and let me just say how I speculated, and I don't think I'm far wrong. We went into a buddy system wherein the lead aircraft that was to be the strike aircraft going to lose the BrahMos or whatever missile had another aircraft 150 kilometers to the rear and flying at altitude, right? So that aircraft could scan the Pakistani airspace and cue the lead aircraft to the target. That leads me to the question, what happened to our Netra AWACS? Why didn't the Indian Air Force use the Netra? This is the reason. You see why you put an aircraft in danger when you should have a Netra AWACS flying well to the rear, able to scan the adversary airspace and let everybody know what is what. So what I mean is the innovation in tactics. We seem to have somehow taken the Pakistani threat, air threat anyway, not as seriously as we should have, even though in past encounters, what I don't call them wars, these engagements, we have had, they have stood up for themselves, and they've given a good account of their own, with their own forces.
But just to switch the spotlight a little back to the Indian side, after those initial, mistakes, as General Chauhan called it, it seems that the Indian air defense has also worked very well. The Akash Tir has worked very well. So what do you think India has got right?
We got it spectacularly right. The air defense system, which is a layered air defense, centered on the S-400. So it starts at, up to 350 kilometers range with tiered and layered kind of air defense missiles and so on and so forth. And with Akash missiles, which are 35 kilometers is the tactical range. And they're very, very good. It's proven to be a great, great weapon system, which we should now sell to the world and make a lot of money out of it. And the thing to do, I think, is that everybody knows that air defense worked well, right? This air defense system is what stopped their counter strikes absolutely dead in the water. They couldn't get anything through. That's the reason why their DGMO called our DGMO, virtually saying, okay, bhai, ab theek hai, let's end it. This is where You see, what I call premature pullout is what happens all the time with the Indian military.
Bharat, I think that phrasing and the wink self-describes your desire for more war, It's just a boys' game where you're concerned because you're not in the land.
No, but let me just add one. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that. But
I'm glad you're so self-aware,
Let me just say that when I talked about the Haji Pir and these kinds of things, I also mentioned in the April 22 post that we should have tried to take Skadu. The idea is when you begin rationalizing to the Saltoro Mustag, and when you say rationalize the border or the line of control, it means you straighten it out. It makes your logistics and everything so much easier.
Okay, I have a very important question to ask, which is that this is a government...
No, let me just finish this point before you ask me. The point to make is that you would have set a precedent and a policy that any time you have a terrorist, ISI, orchestrate a terrorist incident in India, we are going to take a portion of POK for keeps. Do you understand that? That is the disincentive then for the Pakistan army. Because if at any time they have a terrorist incident, we go and take it. It becomes an automatic response. And then you'll see that the Pakistan army will get the message. Not the way every 5 years we have this 2-3 day war and then...
Bharat, since you're a security expert and you are gaming these war scenarios, and the same way as you have this testosteronic male understanding of how Haji Pir should be taken, do you not think there'll be as many testosteronic men on the other side who are also going to do something? So what's your assumption of if the Indian army had been adventuring into taking Haji Pir, in your war game scenario, what do you think Pakistan does? Just sits down?
Well, the usual thing is they try to go through Akhnur. That's the normal stuff. The 12th Division Army, Pakistan...
You sound like you're in a video game, Bharat.
No, I'm not.
Yes.
No, I'm not. I'm not. Because 3-day wars are video games. 3-day wars are not formation battles. Please. So let's be very clear about what you're talking about.
What do you think, is Russia and Ukraine a battle or an engagement in your idea?
I'm sorry?
Is the Ukraine war a war in your reckoning, or is that also an engagement?
No, the Ukraine war absolutely proves that when the Ukrainians gave up the nuclear weapons, they made the biggest mistake of their lives because they trusted the Americans, they trusted Germans, and they trusted UK to give them security guarantees at the Budapest Memorandum signed of 1994. And you had the kind of security guarantees they did not respect. And Ukraine is now in the position when, by the way, had they retained their ex-Soviet arsenal, they would have been the second largest nuclear weaponized country in the world. And do you think Putin would then have dared to do what he's doing now?
But Bharat, you're kind of contradicting yourself because you just said that having nuclear weapons for Pakistan is of no consequence.
Very different things. Very different things. Did I not explain to you why it's a narrow thing? It makes all the difference. The terrain makes all the difference. You cannot equate Pakistan and Ukraine and say, well, you said this, you said that. You have to be clear of what it is that you're discussing. If we're discussing military geography, then Ukraine absolutely has the, shall we say, the margin of error in deterring Russia.
So before I pull Mr. Raghavan into this, the fun question I wanted to ask you is that this is a government that is much more muscular. It has crossed many thresholds. It's much more aggressive in its response to terror. With a security expert like you who's wanting it to go even further, how come they haven't pulled you into the establishment?
Well, I don't want to answer that.
Clearly, you're playing parlor games, whereas there's a real military situation on.
No, let me also say that you'll be surprised.
I'm glad I got you tongue-tied. I'll leave you there.
I won't say anything.
Mr. Raghavan, let me pull you into it. One, what is your response to his game? Adventurism is what I would call it. Are you at all in agreement with it? And then I want to come to the diplomacy question I had asked earlier, that, on the IMF loan, on the Indus Water Treaty, on all the sort of outreach that the Indian government has done, why there's been still a gap in standing by India on the particular terror question. I'm not talking about the whole military standoff, but first your response to what Bharat was saying.
Well, I don't think what Bharat is saying are realistic possibilities. I think it's in the nature of things. I think it's the nature of things that armies make plans, but the counter armies make counter plans.
Yeah, I was just saying.
So if it was so easy that we march into Skardu and we nibble up parts of POK, it would have been each time it would have been done. The fact is that there is no military solution. Just like with China. The Chinese may be many times your GDP, and they may be strategically miles ahead of you, but man for man on the line of actual control, you match them, and they know it. And it's the same thing on the line of control or on the IB. The Pakistanis have enough to deter you, and their aim is to deter you. In this conflict, perhaps we did much better than what they expected, but they can still declare victory, because if it's a draw, or even if it's 60-40 in India's favor, that is still victory for Pakistan, because they have deterred you. It was the same in 65. We think we won the war. In Pakistan, to this day, they're convinced they won the war, because they deterred you. You couldn't, you attacked across the line, the international border, but they stopped you on the outskirts of Lahore, and stopping you is enough for Pakistan. You see, the point is there is no military solution. So what do we do? What does Pakistan really fear about India? It doesn't fear your military. We should disabuse ourselves of that notion. What they fear is the trajectory your country has taken. That you're doing well economically, you've managed to keep yourselves together, you can manage this vast ethnic melting pot, so many contradictions. I think that is what really terrifies them. And that is what you're winning. There's no doubt about it, that despite these terror attacks and despite numerous other provocations, if you look at the trajectory of India and you look at the trajectory of Pakistan in the past quarter century, there is no doubt at all, and this is something where the whole world agrees with you, that you're winning. So concentrate on what you're good at. Don't try to make a military point, because it's only going to end up in another draw.
Right. So on this question, I wanted to ask you
on the IMF and the Indus Waters.
Yeah, so I just want to focus that question in one way, which is that, you yourself have spoken about after the 2008 attack, and Tom Friedman once said that he admires, I know that there's a lot of debate about it, but he admires the fact that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh did not retaliate and went the much slower route of sort of disqualifying Pakistan by providing incontrovertible evidence that they were behind the 2008 attack. And subsequently, again, there's been a lot of proof that Pakistan has supported terror infrastructure. Why is that still in quotes word in the world? In what way is Indian diplomacy failing?
No, I don't think it's a failure of diplomacy. You see, how the world sees evidence has not to do with the evidence. It's to do with their interests. I don't think you need to convince anyone in the United States or in the United Kingdom or anywhere in Europe about the nature of the issues which are there in Pakistan today, and the terrorist groups and all of that. I think everyone knows that. But it is not in their interest to have major military conflict in South Asia with a risk of a nuclear flashpoint. And they will act according to their interests. They will not look at it from, as I said, from your perspective or from the point of view of the provocations which we have to face up to. No, their point is that we don't want this escalation ladder to get out of control. And they will do what they can to make sure that that issue remains the principal point of focus. So we don't have to buy that. We have to act in terms of our own interests. But I don't think we should think that we should kid ourselves that with smarter diplomacy or better diplomacy or keeping a tighter control on the narrative, we can somehow change that. You can't.
Right. So just, we are running out of time. We have to have a cocktail break now. But just last question to both of you, that, it's a world order that is definitely, unshackled. There's a new emerging order. India has been very clear in calling out the hypocrisies of American exceptionalism. It's playing, it has JVs now with countries rather than alliances. It's a new version of non-alignment, which is that you serve your own interest. Again, other diplomats like Nirupama Rao and others have been saying that maybe one has reached the edge of plurilateralism and one should, maybe I'm misquoting her, so let me not name her. There are others saying that India should enter alliances now rather than be plurilateral in its JVs with countries. What do you think about that?
I think our interests are, too contradictory and too diverse to think of managing an alliance system easily. It won't happen. I think one of your central problems is in your neighborhood, partly to do with China, but also partly to do with Pakistan, with Bangladesh. I think with Pakistan, we have to be very clear, and I think we need to draw certain lessons from the history of our interface with Pakistan. And my takeaway from what has happened in the last 2 months, I think in our minds, we have to be clinical about what is relatively good Pakistani behavior and what is bad Pakistani behavior. I think what we saw, and this is my view, others may disagree, what we saw after the LOC ceasefire of February 2021 was a period of 2 to 3 years of relatively good Pakistani behavior. And I underline relatively. The nature of the beast was the same, but it was behaving a little better. And I think that when that happens in our neighborhood, we have to be much more proactive diplomatically.
There, I just want to ask you that maybe they were behaving better because they were in terrible economic crisis. America had stopped funding them.
Yes.
And now the IMF loan is going to embolden them.
But I don't think the IMF loan, makes such a big difference to Pakistan's economy that they suddenly turn on the terror tap. They're turning on the terror tap for other reasons, which are to do with what they see India running away with the ball in Kashmir, and they think they need to check that. It's not because of the IMF loan coming in. The point is that if there is a phase of relatively good Pakistani behavior, what do you do then? I don't think you should deal with Pakistan monochromatically, that this is bad, and unless bad becomes good, there's nothing to be done. Because the world is much too complicated than to proceed on those simplistic assumptions.
So, Bharat, I'll come to you for last words. What do you think? That has India been following a good path in this very chaotic new global order in actually just creating, relationships of self-interest, devoid of ideological frameworks?
The real problem is, if you recall, you raised the issue about why it is that we have had no support from anybody. No one has bought into our narrative. And the reason, I think, is what our Prime Minister told Zelensky and Putin, that this is not an age for war. Now, so it has, that particular rhetoric has come back and bit us in our arse. So what happens now?
Speak into the mic.
So what?
I'm glad you didn't speak that into the mic.
But the point, I think, is that if you're going to be diffident in your foreign policy, as we have been, I'm sorry, you can use a lot of rhetoric about peace, this, that, and the other, but our foreign policy is essentially very recessive.
Sorry?
Recessive.
Recessive,
right? Why? We bill ourselves as a proto-great power, do we not? We want to be Vishwamitra, Vishwaguru, Vishwa this, Vishwa that. Now, the problem with this is that the basic predicate of being a great power is that you have to have a pacified neighborhood. And we fall at the first obstacle. Not one neighbor of ours is friendly to us, other than Bhutan, and they are being courted by the Chinese. right? So, I mean, who are our friends in our immediate neighborhood that we can rely on? Not one. Whose fault is that? I would suggest it is our fault. Why? Because, and this is my favorite theme, if from the very beginning our military was shaped to deal, even after 1971, when we had literally bisected Pakistan, made an independent wing of one of its parts, how come our military did not then shape and realign and orientate towards China as the main and primary enemy, adversary to prepare against? You still have 3 strike corps, completely inappropriate force structure. No wonder you can't deal with, the kind of crises that the Chinese can precipitate at will on the border. It may have changed a little bit now, but the point is, if you do not have mountain warfare specialized forces, but you have 3 strike corps ready to beat up on Pakistan, does it not send a message to whom? Both to the Chinese and to the Pakistanis. To the Pakistanis, that these guys, in a sense, have elevated us to be their main adversary, and to the Chinese, that these guys are idiots. These are strategic pygmies. They cannot deal. I mean, why do they think they are so, shall we say, literally condescending? I remember the former defense minister, K.C. Pant, I was advisor defense expenditure to the 10th Finance Commission, he was chair. And K.C. Pant told me that he had gone to, as a defense minister during Rajiv Gandhi's time, he had gone to Beijing. And he innocently asked, I don't know how innocently, but he asked of the Chinese host, well, what do you think about India, in your threat kind of perception? And he says, you're not on our radar. And he was taken aback. And I told Mr. Pant, why should you be surprised? Why should you be surprised if no one gives a damn for you, because your military is not focused on China and your things is to beat up on Pakistan all the time?
I just have to put a hard stop on this. Pardon my adjectives, but but I just want to say that when you're sort of speaking about Pacific neighbors, America has Mexico pacified, but we must remember that India still, with all these difficult situations, one, we don't have a reputation for adventurism. We don't have a reputation for first attack. We have a reputation for proportionality. We have a respect. Let's not think what the world thinks of us. We respect ourselves. And that's not how many countries are feeling about themselves, because they are economically, socially, politically in turmoil. We're not doing so badly relatively. So I think there are many things to sort of respect about India beyond the party games of how we can destroy China, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Forgive me for taking the moderator's advantage on this. I will allow the audience to speak with you. Let's stop for a cocktail break. Thank you very much for this multifaceted perspectives. And next up, please do join us for an absolute treat. Jaideep Alawat will be joining us after the cocktail break. Do replenish yourselves and we'll see you shortly. Thank you very much.